Hello, and thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled Backup Should Be Background. I'm Kevin Collins from Unitrends, and I'm here with Lutful Kanker of Microsoft and Joe Noonan of Unitrends, and they'll be taking us through the presentation today. Don't forget, one lucky attendee will be walking away with an Xbox One S. We'll contact the winner via email after the webinar. But before we get started, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. This session will be recorded, and after the event, you'll receive an email with a link to the on-demand version of the webinar. I would also encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. You can do so by typing them into the Q&A box in the bottom right-hand side of the player. We'll answer your questions at the end of the session. At this point, I'll turn it over to Joe. Enjoy the presentation, and Joe, take it away.
Great, thank you, Kevin, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate folks coming out and hearing a little bit more about what you might be able to do with backup and continuity with Unitrends and Microsoft Azure. Thanks again to Lutful for joining us today. So Lutful actually comes to us from the Microsoft Azure Technical Evangelist team. So he's out there in the marketplace spreading the word about Azure and what they're doing to foster great partnerships like what we have with Unitrends and Microsoft. But also the solutions, Azure, the services, and how ultimately you can really grow your overall IT service organization through Azure, both in a hybrid and public cloud state. So Lutful is going to give us a great background on that, and something that I'm actually obviously very excited about our partnership. And even when you look at the prize for today's webinar is an Xbox. And obviously, that means a few things. It's not just random, right? So number one, it's a Microsoft product, helps kind of symbolize the partnership here. But also, we've actually done surveys with our customer base and learned that when it comes to how people want to spend their free time, video games is one of the top things people like to do in our specific customer base. So one thing we wanted to do as a part of our overall capabilities, our products, and even our approach to how we do things, from the features that we build in our product and the roadmap going forward, it all really tries to drive simplicity so that people don't have to think about backup and continuity very much, and give you back your free time. And if the way you like to spend your free time is video games, we feel like an Xbox would be a really nice gift for somebody who walks away and obviously spends a little time with us today. So if we take a look quickly at our agenda, Lutful will go first. He'll talk about Microsoft Azure. And obviously a lot of the things happen there, some good prescriptive advice around how you can obviously take on the cloud as a part of your overall strategy. And then he'll turn things over to me, and I'll talk about Unitrends and our backup and continuity solutions for Azure. And it won't just be slide work today. I'm going to move into a demo, and the demo will specifically talk about Unitrends Backup for Azure, and we'll show you how you can get access to it, as well as some of the cool features of it. So at this point, I will turn things over to Lutful, and he can take us away on Microsoft Azure. So bear with us while we switch screens. Great.
Joe, can you see my screen now?
Absolutely, and hear you fine.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So hello, everybody. As Joe mentioned, my name is Lutful Kanker, and I'm an Azure Technical Evangelist with Microsoft. And I'm very glad to be here with you guys and talking about Microsoft Azure and our partnership with Unitrends. So I do not know the overall experience of the full audience with our cloud, but I will kind of go through a standard deck that when we present in conferences to the community and educate them on our cloud. So Microsoft, even though Microsoft Azure and the public cloud, whole public cloud story is relatively new, I mean, I'm talking 6-7 years, we have always had cloud-related technology in place. We are one of the first with the whole public email with Hotmail, Bing, Skype, as you know. So it's while Microsoft Azure is a big part of Microsoft's overall focus, we have other areas, which in fact some of them runs on Azure today. So if you look at our overall presence around the globe, we are very fast growing. We have 30 regions. That's not data centers, that's regions. Each region may have multiple data centers within. And we already have 30 live and 6 already announced, and that's going to rapidly grow. We own majority of our data centers, and majority of our regions are owned and built by Microsoft. But we do also have some data centers that are managed by our partners. And there are various reasons for that, like say for instance in China, there are some legal aspects which we will have to follow, so we have to have a partner manage our data center in China. So as we grow across the globe, you're going to see a lot more regions popping up, and it's happening as we speak. And why, when we talk about public cloud, one of this messaging has been around for a while as well. So I'm just going to go through this couple of slides really quickly. I come from an enterprise background. 7 years ago, I used to work for a large enterprise. And one of the things that we always have seen is while we are bringing in new capabilities and technologies within the enterprise space, oftentimes the infrastructure and the services that requires for us to build the software, which is our primary focus, it takes longer because of the budget constraints, or having to be able to do something on demand requires us to go through accounting and finances and all this kind of stuff. So cloud eliminates a lot of those, right? At the same time, if you did over provision, then you'd get stuck with a lot of the infrastructures that you may not need because your strategy has changed. So in the long run, what you are gaining is on-demand resources, on-demand infrastructure, on-demand capabilities, and you are only paying for what you're using. That's the power of cloud, and it's not just Microsoft Cloud, the cloud in general. You grow with the cloud, and you also develop on the cloud. That's the trend that we see now, as opposed to what we saw at the beginning of our cloud journey, where people were lifting and shifting their existing products to the cloud. So one of the area where we differentiate, or we think we have a strong focus on, is while we are very proponent, we are telling people why they should be using the cloud, we understand the reality. Not everything is ready for cloud. Not everything will ever be on the cloud. There will always be that hybrid mode, at least in the near term, with our partners and customers. So that's why we heavily focus on the concept of hybrid. And the hybrid could be within cloud, between clouds, and then between cloud and on-prem, or between cloud and a hosted partner supplier of that are not actually a cloud, but they're just hosters. And we know who they are. I'm going to give you just a quick example, like say, for instance, a public cloud, that's a pure public cloud, would be somebody like Microsoft Azure or AWS or Google, versus a rack space would be like, say, for instance, a hoster that provides infrastructure but don't provide a lot of the values of your public clouds. You also have your softwares that always going to be running on premise, and we understand that they will have to talk amongst and between themselves at all points for your overall solution to work properly. So as I said, when we started with our cloud journey, public cloud journey, we came from a little bit different direction from where AWS came from. AWS started with infrastructure, where we came from the platform as a service side. And as we both the largest clouds in the globe grew, we both realized both are vital and important. So now we are kind of meeting in the middle. They have built up their platform as a service offerings, while we have built up our infrastructure as a service offering for the past few years. And as a result, now you see a lot of the parities between us two clouds. And we also understand that while you are building and managing your resources on the cloud, you have to always keep in mind that now you have your resources across multiple data centers in different types of deployment modes. You need the capability to manage them within the same monitoring solutions, whatever that is that you use. And we are heavily focusing on those as well to make sure you just don't deploy on the cloud, you also can manage them efficiently. I mentioned earlier IaaS and PaaS. These are terms, but they're very important to understand if you are relatively new to the cloud. Because as I said, we started with the platform as a service side, where we not only just wanted to provide infrastructure, capabilities. We wanted to build services that could be easily consumable and build solution with. And we leveraged a lot of our existing softwares, like say, for instance, we think about SQL servers, all those things we provided as a service from the very get-go. But we also recognize that on the infrastructure side, it's very important. Sometimes it's just a lift and shift. You need a very specific type of VMs, and it could be non-Windows VMs. And as a result, you may have seen us heavily focusing on non-Windows VMs, like Linux being what we call a first-class citizen on our cloud right now. We are, as we are building, you're going to see we are going to go more and more open source style of cloud offerings besides just Microsoft brands and Microsoft stacks. This is actually the slide that we can put up and we can talk for a long period of time, but I'm not going to do that because I have a very limited amount of time here. This is at a very high level, through big lens, what we provide via our Microsoft Azure cloud. If you look at it at the bottom, we do have the infrastructure services that could be consumable as is. You could just take our compute, storage, and networking and build everything from the scratch. You install your software on the top of it. You bring what you have on premise, whether it's Linux, Windows. You can just mimic that on the cloud. We are also building what we are calling the platform services on the top of it. So, and it's ours and non-Microsoft brands that we are offering as what we call services, application services. And it ranges from all different levels, right? So you can have just a database service versus you could have actually a media type offering where all you have to do is to feed a media ingest URL, and now you have a live streaming going through our cloud. So you have now options to how you want to build your solution on Azure, and as we are learning, we are bringing in much more capabilities onto our platform services to make sure that we bring you as close as possible before you actually start building your solution on our cloud. One of the things that we do talk about, and one thing I didn't want to miss here, is that we have a heavy focus on management and security on our cloud. You can learn a lot about what they are via Azure.com. I don't want to go deeper into this. That's going to take a while. And the hybrid cloud capabilities that we're building, that's on the right side. So I'm going to go really quickly here just to make sure I have enough time for this. Okay. We work with various types of customers and partners, and we see a lot of different patterns. We see some customers that has old applications that are legacy that will probably be sunsetted over the next few years, versus we see customers want to innovate with us. Like, say, for instance, we are heavily focusing on certain areas like artificial intelligence, genomics, media, that if you think about it, like those worlds are changing. Media now, while we were heavily dependent on cables in the past, now it's all going OTT. How we can make those transitions happen very easily. You build them on the cloud so that that's native to the cloud versus your classic applications. You just lift and shift as it is. As you start working with us, since we have learned over many years with different types of customers, we'll be able to help you from Microsoft side on what architecture pattern works best for you, given which application or which solution you want to either move or build. Joe, how much time do I have? I don't want to make sure I don't go over, so you have enough time to.
Don't worry about it. If you got a couple more minutes, that's no problem, and then we can turn it over. Okay. All right. So I just want to go to one more thing that I want to talk about that's very important. Is as we are building capabilities on our cloud, we are heavily dependent on the ecosystem, our ecosystem partners, and that's where Unitrends
comes into play. They are a tier 1 partner for Microsoft. We know we will not be able to build everything on our cloud. We will always be dependent on our partners. So we work very, very closely with our partners as well as we work with our end customers to make sure that we are providing them with the right resources, right type of functionalities and capabilities so they can build their solution because they are the experts on our cloud. On a regular basis, we work, our engineering teams works together, and that's how, at the end of the day, we bring the best capability for you guys who leverages those solutions on our cloud. I do not want to take, I know that, Joe, you were going to go through the solution stack, and you're going to talk about what your solution, how it's built, or what value it provides on Azure. But I just wanted to say quickly that the momentum that I have seen, I've been in this field, I've been with our cloud for several years now. So the momentum has been tremendous in the last few years. We are I'm not going to spit out these numbers as you can see this. We are at a point where cloud is becoming mainstream, or if it is not, in my mind, I think infrastructure as a service is mainstream. Like the platform as a service, application services, people are still adopting. But we are seeing that huge spike where everybody now is focusing on cloud because of the specialized value that the cloud can provide. We believe that we are there where now we can support the major needs of the major demand, software demands that the world has. So I'm going to stop there, Joe, unless you want me to cover anything else. Here again, like as you can see how fast we are bringing in all these features and capabilities on a daily basis. We are working with engineering teams from our side to make sure we bring feedback from our end customers and our partners, and we cannot bring enough capabilities because of the demand that we are seeing on the cloud, on the whole cloud space. So I'm going to stop there, Joe. I will let you take over, and I will sit through and see if there's any questions at the end.
Great, thank you, Lupul. Appreciate the great insight there. So as presentation moves back over to me. All right. So now we'll obviously get into Unitrends and its role for backup and continuity for Microsoft Azure. We've actually done some prior webinar content before, and we have plenty of solution briefs out there that kind of talk about some of the generic benefits and use cases that go along with backup and continuity in Azure. This presentation is really going to dive into the products, right? We're going to be talking about Unitrends specific pieces to this, and then we're going to get into a demo. One thing I'd like to kind of continue to, reiterate from what Lupul had ended with there, when you see the uptake in Microsoft Azure, Unitrends actually did a survey of its own a little bit late in last year, and we asked our customer base. So I think over 15,000 to 20,000 customers responded and told us that Azure actually was beating out Amazon in terms of interest in our customer base for cloud. And a lot of folks look at Amazon and think, giant in terms of cloud, but Microsoft is just becoming so powerful and growing so quickly that in just a short period of time has really made a huge dent, not only in the market, but even in our base. You just see a lot of folks really being very, very interested. Partners are driving that demand to us all the time as well. And that goes to Microsoft's partner focus. And even on the right, this is a third-party survey through RightScale, but they actually showed that when you start looking at infrastructure and platform as a service, those experimenting and planning to use Azure far outweigh those in that same state with AWS. So again, I think great hype and great momentum around Azure, and that's honestly why Unitrends spent more time developing more advanced features with Azure first versus other cloud providers. So we'll talk quickly about the 5 use cases that we support today with Microsoft Azure, and then I'll get into the demo. And here's kind of the gambit of them. And to be honest, this is a pretty broad plethora of capabilities. And so it can get pretty difficult to kind of distill this down and say, okay, how does Unitrends help me? So The way I would break this down really is that if you're a partner and you're looking for Azure-based solutions, things that are going to help drive Azure consumption and usage for you and your customers, all 5 of these are pretty interesting for you, I think. And you can kind of see how it goes from people migrating to the cloud to leverage infrastructure as a service for their production application, leveraging Microsoft Azure for disaster recovery. So it's your secondary site. That infrastructure is easy to set up just through a subscription, and you no longer have to manage a secondary data center. And of course, when you start thinking about backup and data protection, having off-site copies for compliance of those backups. So you still have an on-premise environment. You're still protecting that data on-premise. You want to have local recovery very quickly, but you want to make sure that you comply with obviously many of the standards that are out there, and you have secondary copies that are off-site. We always recommend that anyway. Being able to leverage Azure as a means for that, and being able to leverage it in a way that has our compute at the other side that does, interesting things like WAN acceleration, global deduplication, and all those cool features we'll talk about later. Being able to have that with Azure as the infrastructure on the other side is a big benefit. And then, of course, as folks are migrating to Azure and are leveraging infrastructure as a service and running VMs out there, it's important that you're still protecting them. So we're able to actually run our software out there and protect your Azure environment, and of course centrally manage that with your on-premise environment if you live in that hybrid cloud state. And obviously we'll get into that use case in a little bit more detail. And then the last one, just basically leveraging Azure storage for direct backup storage. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the pros and cons to that one and where I think it fits the best and where Unitrends fits there. So first, focusing on migration and disaster recovery. So Unitrends has a specific product that was purpose-built for this. The product's name is Boomerang. You can see it on our website. Naturally, this is a simple download. It's a virtual appliance you can install in your environment. It supports VMware today. So it's very, very purpose-built and focused. And the reason we do that with a lot of our technologies, as we kind of grow and expand what we want to do, sometimes we'll leverage a kind of separate product offering to grow and mature that technology and then integrate it into our all-in-one backup appliances and backup virtual appliances. So today, this is a standalone virtual appliance that specifically takes VMware virtual machines and replicates them out to public clouds like Azure and allows you to either just do a single failover and migrate your workloads into Azure, or you can obviously fail back and leverage it for disaster recovery. So really cool, very, very simple, very purpose-built solution. And the big thing here is it's insanely cost-effective. So folks looking to get disaster recovery service levels that they've never had before because they could never really afford any kind of secondary site or solution that can give that to them, this is a great product that fulfills that need. So just looking at the migration piece of it, migration is really the one-way version of disaster recovery, right? Replicate out, test, make sure your migration is going to work, and then obviously do the cutover, and at that point you stay there, and you're not expected to come back. And the way that it works is it'll replicate VMware virtual machines to the low-cost Azure Blob Storage. It'll remodel those VMs and all the network around that, so it's not just about a VM and its data, it's about everything around that VM and how it networks. We'll take that configuration and remodel it into the native cloud format within Azure. It doesn't use any compute in the Azure cloud during that replication process. And that's really key, especially if you're a smaller environment looking to do 5 to 100 virtual machines or so. Running compute out there in that type of scenario, the compute can start costing a good bit of money, and not using it when you don't need it is something that's pretty important, we think. And then, of course, it automates all the steps to failover as well as come back to VMware in that environment. And obviously, we'll support more than just VMware in the future, because a big part of what we're doing with this technology as we mature it now as a standalone product is we'll be integrating it more and more into our recovery series and Unitrends backup appliances. And what that means is it's going to support heterogeneous physical and virtual environments across the board. So now focusing on off-site backup copies and backing up Azure VMs. So now we're switching focus a little bit here to backup at this point. So a lot goes on with this slide. I think the key part here is that when you start thinking about off-site backup copies, inherently there is an on-premise environment that we're protecting. We do that protection with a Recovery Series physical appliance, or we do it with a virtual appliance called Unitrends Backup. And we support over 250 operating system hypervisors and application versions with those products. So highly heterogeneous, very broad scale in terms of what we can protect. And naturally, it's always great to get your data off-site as well. So you'll have that local copy of backup for any kind of local recovery. And then, of course, the backup data can be replicated out to Azure. And I think the big piece around this is that the solution is Microsoft certified. It's available in the Azure Marketplace so that you can obviously deploy that backup copy target out into Azure. And it handles a lot of great features around encryption, global deduplication, WAN acceleration, and such to make sure that obviously, you know, you're doing things effectively and efficiently. Now, the other use case here with Unitrends Backup, so we can obviously back up and we can deploy agents into the cloud virtual machines out there and we can protect them, right? I think it's important to realize that just because you're running in the cloud and you have lots of redundancy around storage, it doesn't mean you don't need to protect, right? People can still delete things and things can still happen that corrupt data. And they can have no fault of the cloud provider at all. It could be, in most cases it is, just, you know, manual user error, or someone comes in and does something a little bit unexpected, or ransomware hits you, or whatever that might be. But ultimately, data protection is still needed. You want to be able to back up those workloads, and naturally from that point after backup, you obviously need to be able to recover granularly, you know, from that data, and even potentially replicate that data elsewhere, right, even outside of the cloud for other compliance purposes. So in the last use case here, direct backup storage. So to be honest here, we're talking about online backup. I'm not a huge fan of online backup, especially for folks really looking to protect critical data. The recovery aspect of obviously pushing and pulling everything over the WAN and not having any kind of local copies there, to me, I think you're missing out a little bit on that overall continuity strategy. So I don't love it for that, but at the same time, we know some people are leveraging online backup. Unitrends doesn't have any specific online backup solution. We typically will always do an on-premise backup first. Now, there's an exception. When we think about SaaS backup, here we're talking about cloud to cloud, right? Microsoft Office 365, for instance, is something that Unitrends protects. This isn't a separate product. It's not something you install on-premise. It's a service. And that service is built and based off of Azure. And so now you have basically this entire cloud service around Office 365 in the Microsoft cloud. And that's a SaaS-based service. And of course, infrastructure is always redundant, highly available, and all that good stuff. But what we still do is we ultimately protect that data that you have for email, for SharePoint, and for OneDrive. And we can protect that within Azure Storage to ensure that you have secondary copies of that information, and you have a nice self-service user interface that allows you to do any kind of granular recoveries of those specific objects. So again, it's a service, not a product, no installation required whatsoever. We're taking snapshots automatically for you, so there's no backup management at all. And data is kept forever unless you tell us you want to keep it less frequently. With less duration. And naturally, this is just one of those things where, you know, it provides that second level of protection that people aren't always thinking they need when it comes to cloud-based software as a service. But it is absolutely a requirement and something that Unitrends can sell in a very, very simplistic way. So then we have a great solution there. So at this point, I will cut over to my demo of Unitrends Backup. Keep in mind, I did actually speak to a couple of different products there, right? Boomerang, Cloud Backup for Office 365, as well as Unitrends Backup. We'll talk a little bit about that portfolio later to summarize things. But hopefully at this point you're able to see the user interface here for Unitrends Backup. So I'm going to be pretty quick through this demo. This isn't super, super deep, but want to make sure that folks have a pretty good understanding of what we're able to do here. So I'm actually going to start with the Azure Marketplace. So basically, if you look at the two use cases we talked to that this product actually supports, right? It's Offsite Backup Copies, and it's backing up Azure VMs. In both cases, we're actually going to run a virtual machine within your Azure subscription, and you can deploy that very simply through the Azure Marketplace. It's all certified through Microsoft. It's run through all the testing that their certification requires. And within the Azure Marketplace, after that deployment, you'll be able to obviously start managing the product. Within the Azure Marketplace, we have lots of great links to resources. Highly recommend taking a look at those. Just bringing that up very quickly, you can kind of see here, you're going to get a demo today, but you can get other demos. We have a great FAQ, an important deployment guide. I think it's always good to make sure you're checking out those things as well as best practices. And we even talk about some of the other solutions that are Azure related that you can start leveraging. So definitely recommend folks go to the marketplace, check out these resources, make sure you're prepared to take this on and add this into your solution. So I think we give you a lot of good resources there. Something else to realize is that it's a BYO model. BYOL model. So with Azure, you're obviously going to deploy that virtual machine into your subscription. You'll pay Microsoft for the usage. And for Unitrends, on the software side of things, you get a free 30-day trial of that particular of the virtual machine and all its capabilities. And if you want to go beyond 30 days and make a purchase, that's just basically done through a Unitrends partner. So it's bring your own license. So you contract that through Unitrends and its partner base. I think the last thing that's pretty interesting to talk about is scalability around this. So that Azure virtual machine, it's a Linux-based machine. I believe the largest, and Lutful can correct me here if I misstate this because these things change so quickly in terms of how fast Microsoft's adding scalability. But I believe the largest amount of storage you can add to a single virtual appliance is about 64 terabytes. And that's a lot of storage for most people. But of course, if you need more than that, and you're going to be backing up a lot of data, or you're going to be doing backup copies, or both out to Azure, and you need more, of course you can run multiple virtual appliances in Azure and centrally manage those, as well as centrally manage it across your on-premise recovery series or Unitrends Backup appliances. So pretty powerful capabilities there. And now I'm going to get into the product. So this is actually the user interface for Unitrends Backup. This UI will be something that you would use whether you're running Unitrends Backup in Azure. It'll be the same user interface if you're running on-premise recovery series physical appliances. So it's all basically the same software powering those two. There's different deployment models, and obviously a little bit more of an all-in-one approach with the physical appliance where you get the hardware, the software, and the storage basically all bundled and integrated together. So from the dashboard screen, one thing I always like to make sure people understand is obviously this centralizes everything from your local assets to your cloud assets as well as your off-site copies in Azure. Or any location, to be honest. If you do have a secondary site, if you're using Unitrends Cloud or other clouds, it centralizes all that. We like to make sure that people aren't spending a lot of time on backup, but we know that there are people that like to be a part of technology communities. And we actually built that into the user interface so that people can be a part of the community faster. And the end result, the benefit to end users here is that we have a lot of great information that you can get from our community. And we have dashboard tiles that integrate directly with it. And this is a live feed that will continue to pump in, different information into this. So you'll be able to see, obviously, what's trending and what's new within the community. Makes it very easy to obviously sign up as well and be a part of that in terms of getting an account. So, obviously, again, you don't want to spend all your day in our user interface. You don't want to look at it very often. But naturally, if you are the type of person that likes to get involved, we make it pretty easy. So I think something I'll point out now is just a little bit about some of these tiles. Obviously, you can move these around. You can customize. There are some different tiles you can add. So obviously, you always want a highly customizable dashboard interface to make sure it's showing you what you need. But everything about this is really driving simplicity, right? I can very quickly click in to see if there were errors, what those errors were. Obviously, we don't have any in this environment at this point. I can quickly understand risk for new machines added to the environment that aren't protected. And of course, I can see some trending information around backup speeds, storage size, and even break it out based on what we're reading from that production storage, what we're writing to the backup storage, and how the process is performing on our deduplication, whether it's the speed or the actual size bit. And one point that I'll note here is you see this backup copy hot targets. So if you were to actually be protecting on-premise virtual machines, physical machines, whatever that was, with a Unitrends Backup appliance, virtual appliance, or a Recovery Series physical appliance, obviously if you're doing off-site backup copies, those backup copy targets will be listed here as dashboard items, and hot targets are basically any target that has our software on the other side of it, right? It makes a secure connection, and we call it hot because ultimately versus cold, because that data is more readily available for recovery, and obviously adds a lot more functionality that improves RPOs, improves bandwidth efficiency and all that, and that's because we can run our software on the other side. So if I take a look first at the idea of protecting Azure virtual machines, right? So this is a virtual appliance. We have it installed in Azure. You deployed it through the marketplace. I'm going to protect my Azure virtual machines. It's pretty much ultimately the same thing, the same user experience you would get with protecting anything else on-premise. Right, so I can go to my Protect tab, and I can see everything I'm protecting across the environment. I can filter this based on name. I can search things throughout the inventory. We have a lot of stuff here that's not being protected. If I had an environment like that, I don't know why most people would do that. This is just our demo lab. You can filter very quickly to see what failed recently, what has successes, what has skipped backups, things like that, and drill into that status from here. So very, very simple, easy to use interface that kind of gives you one click and then drill down types of technologies so that it's simple to get a good view of things. So when I want to set up backups, I'll show you how simple that is. We're actually going to be leveraging an agent deployed into each of the virtual machines that we protect. So even though we protect a lot of different types of things, we make it nice and simple. It can filter that view based on your agent-based assets. I have a couple of these, and I can basically just select what I want. I can choose to do a couple of things around auto-include if I wanted to. We have smart defaults on everything around our scheduling and other options, and you're pretty much done setting things up at that point. It is that simple. Now, don't get me wrong. If you want more power, yes, you can come in here and edit this, and I can choose to include or exclude certain files and folders if I wanted to get really granular. If I wanted to run pre and post scripts, exclude system state, I can do that under advanced. So there's a lot of power here, but really the big thing is that we don't want to inundate you with lots of options and advanced features up front. We make it very simple, 2 steps, and you're done. And if you want to customize, you can under that advanced edit. And that's setting up a backup. It's very, very simple. Obviously, you can do that across many machines in your environment, and we'll do great things like global deduplication across all that data to make sure that your Azure storage isn't being consumed or overconsumed in ways that it shouldn't be. So if I take a look at recovery, because that's obviously the second piece to this, especially in a centralized environment across different types of environments, different types of assets, you need a lot of power in your backup catalog to be able to kind of filter and understand, you know, what backups are which and be able to move quickly through that. So naturally, if you just wanted to look at assets that were in your Azure environment, you could pick the appliance that lives out there in Azure and just look at those. We can filter by dates. We can look at backup and backup copies. So very, very easy to kind of get at what you need. And from a recovery perspective, on-premise, lots of capabilities, right? So this happens to be a Hyper-V virtual machine. I have a backup here for a print server. If I want to do any type of recovery on-premise, I can basically, most popular in terms of full virtual machine recovery is to basically do an instant recovery on-premise back to that Hyper-V environment. And of course, I can get granular in terms of searching and recovering just files or volumes. Now, when I think about backing up virtual machines running in Azure, a couple things to point out here. So I'll actually go find, you know, one of my file servers here. This is an agent-based backup. Azure virtual machines deployed, agents deployed. We're backing it up on a regular basis. And naturally, at this point, I can do all my granular recoveries directly, you know, from my backups and recover those back into any of the Azure machines, especially going directly back into those if you want to. Always powerful to be able to search specifically for that asset and find any kind of string you want. So a lot of power here to be able to find what you need very quickly and return that directly back into the production machine whenever any data is lost. So that's if I'm backing up an Azure virtual machine. So obviously pretty simple approach, very similar user experience to anything you're used to on-premise. Agent-based, obviously, is how we'll be handling this in terms of the specific protection of those virtual machines that are out there. And obviously you can have Unitrends Backup deployed out there to handle all that capability and manage it. Now, if I look at off-site backup copies, I'll just show you very quickly how simple the setup is around backup copy. By running Unitrends in Azure, we're able to create a hot backup copy scenario. And it's very simple for me to basically come in here and add backup copy storage, especially if I want to look at my backup copy targets. So go to my backup copy target side, I'll go to Unitrends, and it'll be another Unitrends appliance, right? This is Unitrends Backup virtual appliance that's running in Azure, so you would choose that. And basically just add the information that you got from the appliance that you deployed in Azure, and you're already in business and you're actually able to see and manage that target. And I have one here, and naturally it's pretty simple to go in and handle advanced capabilities around bandwidth throttling. You can do it very simple through some of our basic drop-downs based on your network connection and speed. You can do custom ones with different schedules, different throttling speeds, different dates and times that you want to actually throttle. Obviously, some people like to do more throttling during the day and less at night. That's something that can be done, and you can manage that all very powerfully, but without really being inundated with a lot of features and options in front of you. It's very simple to get that working. So I've already added my backup copy target. Obviously, if I'm doing backup copies, I have backups needing to be available locally on a recovery series or Unitrends Backup appliance, so that's already in place. I've configured my target, and I'm pretty much ready to go at this point. I just go into the Protect page, and I set up backup copies. I pick the machines that I want to actually perform backup copies with. It'll take a look at the available targets. So here's my hot backup copy. Now notice all those options are gone, right? So when you think about hot backup copies, the way Unitrends works, obviously you need to have those local backups. You can have many local virtual appliances or physical appliances replicating data and copying backups into one Azure virtual appliance, so you can kind of get that multi-tenant, many-to-one sort of scenario going for you. And really what happens here is all you're doing is saying, I want to configure for all the machines that I care about that are critical to make sure that I have backups off-site. I'm going to set that up, and when new backups land locally, we'll replicate those in a very efficient way to your Unitrends Backup virtual appliance living in Azure. And the cool thing about that is when I actually set up that backup copy target, what it does behind the scenes, even though you don't have to worry about doing any of this, is it creates a secure OpenVPN tunnel between your local environment and that backup copy target that's running in Azure. That way you're getting strong security and encryption in transit. And obviously you can set up encryption on your backup target as well if you wanted to have it encrypted at rest. And I'm sure Azure also has some capabilities around being able to set up storage with encryption out there as well. But that setup was all done for you. You didn't have to set up a whole bunch of options or networking or things like that. You can, if networking is tricky, there's lots of things you can do to obviously have more power and control. But in the end, the setup's very simple. And even when you're setting up the jobs, it's literally just saying, I'm going to protect these machines, go. And basically, as new backups land, we'll replicate them. If you want to throttle bandwidth so that we're not replicating during the day, you use that in the bandwidth throttling section that we just showed. So really, really simple setup around backup copies, and that really makes that process very, very simple, right? There's a lot of security. It's very effective. You don't really need to think about anything other than what you want to copy. And something that's pretty interesting, I think, about that is even if you're protecting your Azure backups that for machines that are running in Azure, if your requirements are forcing you to make sure that you have another copy of those backups outside of the Azure cloud, you can do that. You can basically just have something on-premise or in another cloud where UEB's Unitrends Backup's running, and you can basically have that other location be an offsite backup copy target for your Azure backups. So a lot of power here in being able to kind of replicate as well as obviously take those local backups and do things with them for compliance. And again, on the recovery side, here I think it's always good if you're going to start recovering from off-site backups. We have some very, very simple filters. Of course, you can tell if we're looking at all of them across the board. So let me just basically set up and say I'm going to look at all backups. We have different colors in here just to kind of give you an idea of what might be local versus off-site. Purple means it's an off-site backup copy. But typically I would say it's much more powerful to either filter based on your Unitrends appliance running in Azure or filter based on backup copies. And that'll make sure that you're recovering from the place you intend to recover. So if you have data that is not present at all in any local backups, it's maybe longer term and you need to go back to your offsite backup copy target to go and get it, I can easily filter that down to make sure that I'm getting it from the right place. At this point, naturally, a couple of important aspects to recovery when you think about offsite backup copies. One that I actually like a lot, which is really cool. So for any data and any backup that you want to actually bring back on-premise, let's say you want to bring the whole backup back to on-premise. Now, a lot of times you want to do granular recovery, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, but this is actually pretty powerful, is that sometimes you might need to bring back more data than just a file or two. You might need to bring back an entire virtual machine, right? And that's an example here. All I do is basically import that to the source. So I pick my backup, it'll tell me, listen, you don't have to worry about this too much, but this is an incremental backup. I need to actually bring back, the full and all the other incrementals that have occurred since then, right? And that's because this is based on a general full incremental schedule. And I just click import, and what it does is it does a reverse replication process from the Unitrends Backup target living in Azure and bringing that back to your local recovery series or Unitrends Backup virtual appliance. And the cool thing about that is because it's reverse replication, it will continue to use WAN acceleration within that connection. The connection continues to be secure, just like it was when it was replicating out to the cloud. And it's efficient in terms of the sense that global deduplication from the data that's living on your local appliance is also taken into account. So we're only bringing back the data that's different from what's on your local appliance. Obviously, that can reduce in a big, big way the amount of data you have to pull back over the wire. And that's huge, right? Getting data back from the cloud is typically not that efficient and takes a long time. And you don't do it very often, but you still deserve a little bit more efficiency, and we provide that here in that capability. So I really like this feature. It helps you kind of bring back more bulk data sets if you need to. And naturally, any backup that's imported and back in a local environment, you can run things like instant recovery against it, which I think is an awesome thing, right? So it'll just look like an imported backup, which I don't have any in this environment. So if I just look at regular backups, that's where I can run any type of recovery on that backup in the local environment because now it lives locally. So that's pretty cool. I do like that feature. But naturally, in most cases, you want to pull data back from your offsite backups. Usually it's a file or two. So obviously you can basically handle that through the Recover Files option. We'll actually mount that very quickly. I already have it mounted. And basically we'll tell you, hey, listen, this is the machine. It's mounted on your offsite backup target. Just check it, browse to download, and now I'm in business and I can actually start picking what I want to bring back and have that come back to my local environment. So simple, powerful, secure, efficient. I think that's pretty important for what you're trying to do so that you can ultimately go play with that Xbox instead of worrying about your backups. So Kevin, I think that's the end of the demo, end of the webinar. I think we can move into Q&A.
Sounds good. Yeah, we had a few questions come in, so why don't we just dive right in here. First question is, how does online backup affect performance in a cloud solution? Is it a noticeable difference?
How does online backup affect performance? So I think the noticeable difference is really more, there is, so good question. The bigger difference that I think a lot of people will focus on is the fact that with online backup, where I'm not doing any local backup first, and that's what I think of when you say online backup. So if you're thinking about maybe doing a local backup and then copying the backup, my answer will be different, so please ask a follow-up question. But I'll answer for online backup where I'm just backing up directly to the cloud and I don't have a local backup. The bigger thing to focus on, obviously, is that you are now moving all data directly over the WAN on the backup and the recovery side. So that does elongate your backup window, and that can elongate your recovery times as well. Most people typically like doing a local backup first, unless you're just talking about a small amount of data and something very basic. So it certainly, there's a market there. There's use cases where it's very valid. Unitrends doesn't work within those use cases. Most of our customers demand something that's going to be faster from a recovery perspective, so we force the local backup first. But what I will say is when you think about performance on the applications, because a lot of data access, especially in virtual environments, is done through snapshots. When those snapshots are open, there can be a hit to performance on your I/O. Obviously, more I/O will occur when snapshots are open, and that can also fill up storage to an extent as well. And when you're doing backups directly over the wire, those backups are going to take longer because they're over the WAN, so those snapshots are going to stay open longer. Your I/O load on storage is going to be overloaded for a longer period of time. And if you're designed to handle that, you're fine. But not everybody is, and that's usually another big impediment, is that you can see performance impacts on your applications because your storage is overwhelmed by having to take very, very long backup windows, keeping snapshots open too long, and that's kind of what online backup, it's one of the ramifications of it. So it's a great question.
Okay, and a follow-up to that is, how granular can we be with the data that is being stored? Is this more like a virtual drive now?
So one of the things I showed in the demo and I'm not going to go back to it, but certainly, you know, we can always do other demonstrations for you if you want to see this in a little bit more detail. And trials are available. I'll show you where that stuff is too, so you can play with it. But in the backup job area, when you actually just click the edit button on a particular machine, you can start getting very granular based on inclusion and exclusion expressions that you want to set. So if you just want to pick certain files and folders and just kind of a pick list, you can do that. If you want to do inclusions or exclusions based on regular expression, you can do that. So it is powerful in terms of the granularity. Additionally, what I would say is that those inclusions and exclusions, they focus on files. Within Unitrends in those drop-downs when you're setting up your backup jobs, you can also obviously select SQL, Exchange, Oracle, SharePoint, and get very granular in terms of protecting just applications and specific databases if you'd like as well. And that's obviously something that you may want to take advantage of if you have those applications running within your Azure VMs, or if you have them running on-premise and you want to obviously make sure you have backup copies somewhere else.
Okay, next question is, how would you link this service to your Office 365 service? Does it need an on-premise broker, or does all of the traffic go through the cloud?
Great question. So what we just showed here around Unitrends Backup, that's something that you'll manage yourself, because Azure is a cloud that you'll manage yourself, right? In terms of the infrastructure, not the specific servers, obviously, but you'll manage, you know, the servers and things that you have running out there in terms of VMs. And Unitrends Backup will be basically part of that virtual machine subscription that you'll have running out there, and you'll be able to obviously manage Unitrends Backup like you would any other Unitrends Backup instance. Office 365 is a separate service, right? You don't manage that. We manage that as a part of, you know, Unitrends and the SaaS-based offering we have to protect Office 365, which is SaaS-based. So the two work in tandem. They can work together, but they don't integrate in the sense where you deploy something on-premise and you're using that on-premise deployment to configure Office 365 protection and to handle management of Office 365 data. And we don't think you want to do that in most cases. I'd love to get feedback if you disagree, because those conversations are awesome. But the approach we've taken with Office 365 is that the data already resides in the cloud. Is that really something you want to have to pull back on-premise, use your RAM bandwidth for that process, have something that you install and manage locally and maintain, and then also have to manage backup copies and compliance on your own? Most people tell us they want to do less of that. So with our service with Office 365, you don't have to do any of it, right? It basically just says, okay, I'm going to onboard you with the Office 365 credentials. Backups are going to happen automatically. You're going to get a URL to do any kind of self-service search and granular recovery that you need from Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, or OneDrive. So you can run Recovery Series or Unitrends Backup on-premise and protect your Hyper-V, your Windows physical, your Linux, your VMware virtual machines, all that stuff on-premise. And if you have Office 365, obviously that's a separate environment living in the Microsoft cloud, and we have a separate service that we think handles that the way we believe is most efficient for our customers and partners, and the amount of time that they really want to be managing backups. We eliminate it for the most part, almost completely. So hopefully that made sense, but the short answer is they're separate, and they're separate on purpose, because SaaS protection versus on-premise protection, we think, kind of need different approaches.
Okay, next question is, with Microsoft Azure, could I migrate my Active Directory to their cloud? Is that recommended? And then have that backed up to Unitrends?
So good question. Lufo, I think I'll need you on the Active Directory piece around, is it recommended?
Yeah, can you hear me, Joe? Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So that's also a question that has multiple options, right? If you have an Active Directory on-prem, there are three things you can do. Yes, three things. One is you can completely migrate to Azure Active Directory, which is an Active Directory as a service. That's an Azure feature. So that means you are definitely going to be able to use a Unitrends solution against that Active Directory of your own. But if you didn't want to move, or there are other options, another option, which is instead of using Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, you could also host your Active Directory on Azure infrastructure side. So you do exactly what you're doing on-premise versus on the cloud versus you are just doing it on-prem. The third option would be you create an Azure Active Directory and you federate to your on-premise Active Directory. And as far as I understand, you probably will need Active Directory Federation services for that. So I know that our Active Directory team is working towards where that ADFS can be eliminated. There are other options to integrate, but I have to ask them to see if those options are in the near-term roadmap or not. So whether we recommend it or not, I mean, it literally depends on what you guys are leveraging Active Directory for today on-prem. If you need to stay on-prem, you can stay on-prem and you can federate. You can create an Azure Active Directory in the cloud and federate, or yes, you can move to Azure Active Directory, no problem as well. Start over there.
Yeah, thanks, Lutful. And I think that's this Active Directory is always one of those tricky things when it comes to data protection, right? I see a lot of folks not backing it up at all and just leveraging ADFS, or obviously, they leverage Microsoft Azure and just running it out there completely with the services that are there. And then there, of course, are some people that are just like, no, I have to have it backed up. It's a part of my strategy. I want to make sure I have secondary copies as well, and compliance is all there, and I want to be able to, granularly recover for those things. To directly answer Unitrends' capabilities here, yes, if you have an on-premise Active Directory and you wanted to migrate it to Azure, if you chose to just have it running as a VM in Azure and managing it yourself the way you would on-premise, you could leverage Boomerang to do that migration, and Unitrends Backup can run inside that Azure subscription and protect it. Like Lutful had mentioned, there's other options that you may want to consider that could potentially be better for you. But in terms of, if you wanted to do that, migrate it, let it run out there, manage it out there like an on-premise VM, and protect it, Unitrends can handle that full boat of capabilities.
Okay, next question is, can backups from on-site to the Azure VM be restored directly into Azure, even though they are not in the VHD format, but rather VHDX?
So it's a good question, and I'll be honest about where we're at with being able to recover off-site backup copies directly into Azure admin machines. So the backups that you'll actually, really when it comes to recovering into Azure, with Unitrends Backup, you're only going to be able to recover folders, volumes, and files. So it's all about granularity in terms of making sure that in terms of what you can recover into Azure. Boomerang is the product that we use to basically do full failover of machines into Azure. So if you want full DR and failover into Azure, the product you want to use there from Unitrends is Boomerang. We'll basically be able to replicate that VMware environment out to Azure and do a full failover for you and fail back, and that's a DR use case. What we're doing, though, obviously what Boomerang does is Boomerang takes image-based data, stores it in a certain format, and allows all the remodeling and conversion necessary from whatever environment happens to be on-premise into the cloud-native format. That's technology Unitrends owns. What we're going to be doing later this year is obviously integrating that technology into Unitrends Backup and Recovery Series, so that naturally what you are protecting on-premise, whether it's physical or virtual environments, can fully be restored into Azure as virtual machines. And all that remodeling and cool stuff will happen. That's not available yet, so we have the technologies, and that's something that we'll obviously be pulling together from an integration perspective later this year.
Okay, I think we're just about out of time. We have a couple more questions left. We will reach out to you and get you answers on your questions. I want to thank everybody for attending, and a special thanks to Lutful and Joe for this great presentation. We'll be emailing the winner of the Xbox One S probably tomorrow, and we will be hopefully seeing you on a future webinar. Thanks, everybody, and take care.
Great. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Lutful. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.